There are two ways to define an evil person. One is to look inward, to their feelings, emotions, thoughts, and beliefs. The other is the pragmatic approach. It doesn't matter what you feel or think. What matters is what you do. Of course, we all do things that are unlike us from time to time. Even the smartest person in the world will eventually think, say, or do something stupid, and that doesn't make them stupid. But when it becomes something recurrent,
Honestly, as stupid as stupid does.
the reason behind being evil, or doing evil, whichever way you may choose to look at it, has been debated for a long time. Nature versus nurture. I think it's a silly debate that only persists because the question is flawed. It's not a matter of one or the other. There's always a combination of the two of them, but in some cases, one weighs heavier than the other. Each case should be looked at individually, but that doesn't mean we can't categorize them. Today, I have separated evil into three categories: nature, nurture, and convenience. And I'll be exploring what that means, which characters fit into each, where they overlap, and what exactly is the commonality at the center of them all. This is Dissecting Evil in Fiction. Let's start with the simplest one. Although many reject it, seeing it as overly simplistic or even problematic, there is no denying that some people are born with the traits necessary for evil. Dio Brando from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is quite simply malicious. He wishes pain and harm upon others and relishes on their suffering. And if you pair his violent impulses with his complete lack of empathy, remorse, and impulse control, you get a recipe for pure evil. Even though Dio was born into poverty and abuse, with a drunken father and no friends or peers, he is defined by the show itself as not a victim of circumstance, but rather evil from birth. Some of his early evil doings include kicking a dog for no reason at all, burning that same dog alive just to hurt Jonathan, forcing himself on the girl Jonathan likes, and slowly poisoning Jonathan's father to claim his heritage. Jonathan had literally done nothing to Dio beforehand. He had absolutely no reason to do any of that. Later, he would add to the list mass murder, the word that rhymes with grape, and enforced infanticide. Some other traits specific to his persona are his spitefulness, cruelty, ego, and sadism. He doesn't just want to win, he wants to humiliate.
How many loaves of bread have you eaten in your lifetime?
Other characters that also fit the bill of evil by nature include Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter. Hisoka embodies violent impulses paired with a complete lack of empathy and remorse. He doesn't kill out of hatred or vengeance, he does it for fun. His only real goal is to entertain himself through what he loves most, fighting powerful opponents to the death. But unlike Dio, Hisoka isn't particularly malicious. He doesn't go out of his way to hurt others just for the sake of it. He is also strongly insinuated to think that age is just a number. Lorne Malvo from Fargo Season 1 also fits the shoe. He doesn't act out of revenge, survival, or even ambition. He is, in his own mind, a predator doing what predators do: hunt their prey. But Malvo is not as animalistic as he would like to think. Instead, he is more sadistic. He causes chaos simply because he enjoys it. He plays mind games with strangers, manipulates people into murder, and toys with life and death as if it's all a game. There's no backstory or trauma to explain it. He just is. A force of disruption with no moral compass, no remorse, and no reason beyond his own twisted amusement. It is even implied he might be the devil himself.
Did you know the human eye can see more shades of green than any other color?
Characters who see themselves as predators, who completely remove any sort of moral compass from the equation and refuse to view their actions through the lens of civilized society, are a sort of recurring theme in this category. Hans Landa from Inglourious Bastards is another perfect example. He's a Jew hunter, but not out of any special hatred for Jews. In fact, he claims to share certain traits with them, which, in his words, is what makes him so effective at hunting them. His actions aren't driven by ideology. He's simply doing what he's good at. And above all else, Landa is a creature of self-preservation. The moment he sees an opportunity to land on his feet, he flips sides without hesitation. He's sadistic, gleefully toying with people when they're completely at his mercy. He's violent, in a way that's both calculated and emotional. And he's utterly lacking in empathy and remorse, but only for his victims. When one of his subordinates is shot, a scene that, in my opinion, implies a possible romance between them, we see that he is capable of caring for someone, which makes all his other actions even more detestable.
Ooh, that's a bingo.
That's evil by nature, predatory, amoral, and innate. Heath Ledger's Joker could also be argued to fit this category, given how many of the traits align. He's violent, manipulative, remorseless, and seems to genuinely enjoy watching the world burn. However, The Dark Knight leaves the door open for possible external causes. Throughout the film, he tells two completely different stories about how he got his iconic scars. Both are disturbing, both center around abuse, and both contradict each other entirely, except for abuse being the one recurring element. It's impossible to know if there's any truth in either version. They could be pure fabrications meant to manipulate his victims, or subtle hints that there's something buried under all the lies. The ambiguity is the point. Whether he's a product of trauma or a force of chaos incarnate, the film refuses to give a definitive answer. At the end of the movie, when his plan to provoke a ship of civilians and a ship transporting inmates to blow up one another completely fails, he looks genuinely hurt. It would appear it's not just disappointment, but an ideological wound. The Joker wants to believe that deep down, everyone is like him, and what separates them are their circumstances. There is resentment there.
See, I'm not a monster. I'm just ahead of the curve.
This type of character can present as either calculating or spontaneous, or in some cases both. The aforementioned Dio, or Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men, could be seen as the epitome of this category. They exhibit almost every trait we've discussed: malice, lack of empathy and remorse, violent impulses, and they oscillate between careful planning and sudden, explosive action. Anton Chigurh is a rogue assassin with a rigid sense of cosmic order. Like a natural disaster, he appears out of nowhere and kills whoever happens to cross his path. He frames himself as an impartial force of nature, bound by some strange natural law of chance and fate. But his self-image and world vision as cruelly chaotic is challenged late in the movie by this character. When Anton confronts the woman and offers her the coin toss to decide her fate, she refuses. She tells him the coin has no say. It's his decision whether she lives or dies. He's not happy with that. Her refusal threatens the illusion he's built around himself, but it ultimately proves to be a fruitless defiance that changes nothing, as he kills her anyway, and walks away to continue being what he is. Maybe not untouched, but unchanged.
What's the most you ever lost on a coin toss?
The nurture argument is also often dismissed, this time by people who refuse to acknowledge that, under different circumstances, they too could have done terrible things. But when you look at crime rates in disadvantaged communities, you're forced to face a truth. There is a certain level of plasticity inherent to most humans. You either accept this or fall into prejudice and scapegoating. Of course, none of this excuses harmful actions, but it does explain them, and that's important. People shaped into evil by their environment can share a handful of traits. BoJack Horseman has them all. He is the product of trauma. He was emotionally abused by both his parents, neglected, belittled, and resented, blamed for their bitter and unfulfilled lives, and taught that life is nothing but pain. Neither of them were ever satisfied with anything he ever did. The biggest lesson his father ever taught him: everyone will let you down. Don't trust anyone and rely only on yourself. And from his mother, never stop dancing, meaning never stop performing, because when you do, all the love and adoration you receive will disappear. Understandably, BoJack craves love, approval, and acceptance. His whole life is built around seeking admiration, fan validation, and the unconditional love he never received. This desperation leads him to commit awful acts, like betraying his best friend when his fame is threatened, something he deeply regrets, and which costs him his only true friend. But for a long time, he isn't even fully aware of the damage he causes, both to others and to himself, because he's a master of cognitive dissonance. He justifies his actions, looks away, and runs from his problems instead of facing the harm he inflicts. Almost every prominent character in the show suffers because of him. Sarah Lynn, Diane, Todd, Princess Carolyn. Poor impulse control and toxic coping mechanisms collide to fuel substance abuse, sex addiction, and a crippling fear of commitment. Some of his worst acts include trying to sleep with his friend's underage daughter, giving unsupervised access to hard liquor to teens, resulting in one suffering alcohol poisoning, after which BoJack abandons him in the hospital to avoid public scrutiny. Sleeping with a traumatized girl who saw him as a father figure, sabotaging Todd's ambitions, and sleeping with his romantic interest, and encouraging an addict's relapse. These are relapsing behaviors that spiral out of control, often without any regard for consequences. Bojack isn't evil in a mythic or grand sense, but he's the epitome of nurture-driven harm, someone broken by his environment and unable to break the cycle for a long, long time.
Tell me, please, Diane, tell me that I'm good.
Many would place Tony Soprano squarely on the nature side of the spectrum, given the sociopathy diagnosis the show lays over his head. But doing so does a disservice to the character's complexity and requires ignoring a large part of what the show truly explores. Oh no, Tony Soprano is the ultimate manifestation of the overlap between nature and nurture. He presents every single one of the characteristics from both sides. Resentment, he is filled with it, resentful of the role of mob boss he feels was imposed on him. He resents happy people, successful people, oblivious people. He resents anyone in his life who couldn't help him and who doesn't suffer as he does. From his wife, who enjoys the riches of his job without getting her hands dirty, to his son, whom he sees as similar to himself, but with the privilege of a better life and a good chance for a bright future. This resentment festers into repressed anger, which manifests as depression, panic attacks, and violent impulses. And of course, he lacks impulse control, not only with violence, but also with the vices he uses to dull his pain. He is a serial cheater, a degenerate gambler, and an excessive eater and drinker. He justifies his evil doings with countless lies, cognitive dissonance. He's just a soldier. He's doing what he has to as an oppressed Italian American. He's taking care of his family, etc., etc. And if he's ever caught red-handed and has nowhere to hide, he lashes out. What makes his self-deception even easier is his willing ignorance. He parrots every kind of prejudice without a second thought, not just to deflect guilt or justify his actions, but also to reinforce the toxic worldview that makes him feel powerful and part of something. His own misery finds relief in the pain of others, making him a malicious person that acts to drag people down with him. While not completely lacking empathy and remorse, these abilities have been severely eroded after decades of evil doing, as he became more desensitized to violence, murder, and abuse. Each killing chips away at what little humanity he might still have. It's like every corpse he leaves behind is another nail in his own coffin. His evil shows itself in both spontaneous outbursts and cold calculations. He'll beat someone senseless for something as petty as being more muscular than him, but he's also capable of chilling premeditation, like the countless hits he puts out on people, or that he carries out himself. But the most heartless of all is when he kills his own cousin, Christopher Moltisanti. That moment isn't just rage, it's calculation. Christopher's hatred towards Tony is a stark reflection of Tony's evil. Besides, he is a liability, drug-addicted, emotionally unstable, and increasingly a risk to snitch on Tony. After a car crash, Tony sees the opportunity to eliminate a loose end. He considers helping only to then quietly smother him. Later, he lies about it without flinching, annoyed at having to pretend to mourn. It's one of the most damning moments in the series, a moment that completely exposes the hollowness of Tony's self-image as a family man.
Whatever happened to Gary Cooper? The strong, silent type.
The following category is closely related to nurture, but differentiates itself because these characters didn't lead an underprivileged life. They had the tools to do better, but didn't. The show The Good Place would argue that most of us fall into this category, as it explores how seemingly normal people end up judged as evil and sent to hell, because it turns out that the modern world forces you to engage in evil acts by being part of a system that couldn't exist without relying on the oppression of others. The show isn't saying that's a fair way to judge someone's character. Instead, it critiques how human nature inadvertently causes harm and shows how most people have the capacity for good if given the correct nourishment. The main cast, who find themselves in the bad place masquerading as the good place, are all far from malicious people. They're just too caught up in the turmoil of their own lives to stop and examine their impact on the world. Eleanor was selfish and manipulative, relying on lies to get ahead. Chidi caused harm through indecision and paralysis, dragging others into misery while trying to do the right thing. Tahani was consumed by status and vanity, offering help only when it served her image. Jason was impulsive and thoughtless, always making choices that endangered others without even realizing it. None of them were evil in the traditional sense, but they all failed to consider the consequences of their actions. In a hyper-connected modern world, even mundane choices carry hidden harm. Ultimately, their dooming traits are their inertia, ignorance, lack of consideration, and cognitive dissonance. That being said, Walter White is a different case. He weighs in a different scale for the evils he commits. Walter possesses empathy and remorse. He struggles deeply with taking a life, even when it's a drug dealer threatening his own. And he battles feelings of guilt over killing an innocent woman only to further his own agenda. But over time, he comes to justify his participation in an illegal system, one that repeatedly forces him into situations where hurting others becomes a necessity. The two main weapons he uses to rationalize his dissent are family and self-defense. But underneath those fickle reasons lies his pride. Everything he does is ultimately self-serving. His deep insecurity and dissatisfaction with his life fuels his need to feel competent and above the rest. He willfully ignores the ripple effect of his actions, distancing himself from the damage caused by his product and the violence that follows it. He chooses to remain ignorant, or pretends to, whenever the reality becomes too inconvenient. But the pain and suffering he leaves in his wake are impossible to ignore. A miserable wife, a traumatized son, and a depressed partner in crime he manipulates again and again. Despite everything, Walter shows a lack of consideration for them, especially as his priorities shift from providing for his family to satisfying his pride, ego, and thirst for control. Some of his crimes include child poisoning, bombing a hospital, sexual assault, drug manufacturing and trafficking, and mass murder.
I am the danger.
Gando Ikari overlaps with the nurture category. As it's heavily implied, he suffers from many of the same psychological wounds as his son, Shinji Ikari. Ironically, wounds he himself inflicted. These include fear of abandonment, self-hatred, and a profound lack of self-worth. That's very sympathetic and all, but it gives him zero justification for psychologically abusing his son, committing child endangerment, and ultimately causing the apocalypse, all in order to reunite with his dead wife. Gando chooses to manipulate, not because he has no other options, but because it's easier to control others than to confront his own grief. He doesn't change because change would require accountability, and that's a luxury he, conveniently, doesn't allow himself. Instead, he pairs emotional suppression with cognitive dissonance to justify his behavior. Not that he really needs it, since his own cycle of self-hatred and bad actions feed one another. Oh, I am such a bad person, I'm going to do a bad thing now. Oh no, I hate myself even more. I guess I'll just do another awful thing. And there I go, being the absolute worst. Might as well do it again because I'm such a piece of shit. Evangelion, being the show that it is, doesn't just offer more than enough introspection into its characters, but also positions them in relation to their role in society and how that negatively impacts them. Shinji's predicament with self-worth and emotional repression screams toxic masculinity, and by extension, so do Gendo's, meaning that their struggle is partly systemic. And that's why, even though we don't get a lot from Gendo's perspective, I believe he perfectly fits in the overlap between convenience and nurture.
Forgive me, Shinji.
This video is getting long, but I want to mention one more character that is unlike most others in this video. One character that at first glance seems completely unremarkable, but at closer inspection perfectly represents from where so much of the evil in this world stems from. Jerry Lundegaard from Fargo. It all starts because Jerry is a greedy, stupid man with a thirst for approval, which leads him to make several investments that backfire, resulting in a huge debt. By that point, all that Jerry needs to do is ask his obscenely wealthy father-in-law to lend him the money he needs. But that would be humiliating, and it would make him a nuisance. So instead, he decides to plot the kidnapping of his own wife to extort the money he needs, and maybe a little more, from his father-in-law. The details of the plot he devises are very poorly thought out, which results in a bizarre chain of events that ends up with many, many innocent people dying and nobody getting what they wanted. Of course, he never intended that. What he wanted was victimless crime. Yet, he is undoubtedly the source of the evil that takes place in Fargo. But where does that unwanted evil come from? His greed? His cowardice? His stupidity? Yes, but we can go deeper. Jerry's evil is profoundly human and way too common. When faced with a problem, what dictates his actions are his insecurities and deeply engraved habits. Don't be a nuisance for others, don't ask for help, make yourself useful, be a man, be competent. Psychologically, to go against those commandments would be the most difficult thing for him. So, ironically, the incredibly intricate path he chooses is the path of least resistance. He comes up with the idea and executes it, not thinking to consider the possible consequences and suffering from extreme short-sightedness. This character showcases how so much evil in this world is simply the result of stupid, ordinary men who can't go against the flow and would rather take drastic measures instead of looking inward.
Oh, jeez.
As for the overlap between nature and convenience, I'm choosing a divisive character to represent it, Light Yagami. I'm sure many of you would think he belongs entirely on the nature side, given the sheer extent of his maliciousness, mocking victims in their final moments and taking joy in their deaths, as he does with Ray Penber, Misora, L, and almost Nier as well. He considers killing Misa while hugging her, manipulates her emotions with no remorse, contemplates murdering his own sister, uses and discards Takada without hesitation. The list goes on. But hear me out. We know for a fact that Kira exists only because of chance. If Light had never picked up the Death Note, he would have followed the same ethical code as his father and become a detective, a politician, or something of the kind to help people. Am I saying the Death Note corrupted him and is solely to blame? Not quite. Prideful, egotistical, vain, competitive. Those were already existing traits that the Death Note exacerbated by putting him in a position of absolute control over the world. What makes Light dangerous isn't just what he's born with. It's the institutional power the Death Note gives him, and how fast he adapts to using it. His morality dissolves not because he's challenged, but because it's convenient to let it dissolve. He turns utilitarian ethics into an excuse to preserve his ego. And at every junction, he chooses the easiest path of avoiding accountability for the cruelty of his actions, regardless of the cost to others.
I will become the god of this new world.
As for what connects them all, I already gave you the answer at the start of the video. And even if you didn't catch it then, I'm sure by this point you can piece it together. All of these characters hurt others. And that includes characters we don't know enough about to place definitively on the diagram, but whose actions are undeniably evil. Sho Tucker, Makishima, the dwarf in the flask. Or maybe you disagree with me, in which case, where do you think they should be placed? Any other placements you'd modify? And here's a tricky one for you. Johan from Monster. Let me know what you think. I'll be reading and responding.